My name is Miss Yellow Shoes, and today I'm going to show you how to sew this adorable cow doll. If you're looking for the pattern, check the description box. Instructions and patterns for sewing the clothes can also be found in the description box. I have all of my pattern pieces cut out. Today I'm just using a cotton cow print fabric. You can also use flannel, which makes it really soft. I will be using felt for the cow's nose and for the horns. This is about a half yard of fabric. You can get several dolls out of this. I am going to use pins to put my pattern pieces on my fabric, but you could also trace the pattern piece with a water-soluble pencil or with chalk. You will notice that on some of the pattern pieces it says cut with a 1/2 inch for seam allowance. All of these pieces are marked so that you know as you are cutting out your piece to add a 1/2 inch around the edges for seam allowance. Each pattern piece also says how many of each you will need. You will need to cut out 4 of the legs, 2 of the body, 4 of the ears. You will also need to cut out 4 of the arms. And we will talk about the nose and the horns later. I'm going to cut out my doll piece right now because when I cut out my limbs, I like to fold over my fabric, so I cut out all 4 pieces at once. You could take a water-soluble pencil or a piece of chalk and trace about a 1/2 inch around the pattern, but I'm just going to eyeball it. So this is what it looks like when you cut it out with about a 1/2 inch of seam allowance around the edge. And now I'm going to do the limbs. I like to fold my fabric over, so I cut out all 4 of the pieces at once. You will notice on the arm and on the leg pattern there is a star, which tells us to cut with a 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Now for the ears, we are going to need 2 pieces with the cow print and 2 pieces with the inner ear fabric. Now to make sure that I cut out the exact same shape, what I'm actually going to do is take this bit right here and lay it on top of the fabric I've chosen for the inner ear. I'm going to pin it all together so that when I cut out the inner ear, it is the same size as the outer ear. Now I'm going to cut out the snout. I'm just going to pick a pink felt for that. I think I'm going to use this piece right here. You do not need to cut a seam allowance for the snout. Now, we do have to do something special when it comes to the doll horns. I am going to be using this piece of felt for my doll horns. Because the doll horns are so small, it is much easier to sew them first and then cut them out of the felt. To do that, I'm going to fold my felt over, roughly about there, and I'm going to cut myself out a piece so that I have enough room to work with my fabric and enough room for 2 horns to be traced onto the fabric. I have my piece of felt, and along the bottom edge, I'm going to place my pattern for my horn. I am using a chalk pencil to trace out the pattern onto the felt. I have the pattern very subtly traced onto my felt. Now I'm going to fold it in half, making sure that my horn pattern lines up like this, where the curved edge is at the top and the bottom of the horn is down here at the flat part of my felt. And now I'm going to pin. Should look something like this. First thing that I'm going to show you to do is how to do the horns. You're going to sew directly onto the line that you traced all the way around, leaving the bottom open. I'm just going to be using a straight stitch, about a 1.5, pretty tight. It's also a really good idea to back stitch when you first start, so that when we are turning our pieces right side out, they hold together. All right, the first one's done. I'm going to snip my thread. See? So we stitched all the way around, and then we're going to do the same thing for the other one. Now I'm going to cut the horn out of the felt piece, leaving myself a little bit of room around the edge. I'm going to turn my horns right side out so I don't see the raw edge. Some people do like the look of the raw edge, so you can leave it like this. You could also do a zigzag stitch all of the way around for durability or just for a really cute look, but I'm going to turn mine right side out. It can be a little bit tricky. You might need to use a pencil or a chopstick to help it turn right side out. Now I'm going to work on the ear, so I'm going to pin an inner ear to an outer ear piece, right sides together. So my pieces are pinned together, right sides together. I'm going to sew using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm also going to be using a straight stitch. Don't forget to back stitch to lock everything in place. I have both of my ear pieces sewn together. I'm going to cut off the excess to reduce the bulkiness when I turn my pieces right side out. Now I'm going to turn my piece right side out. My ears are now turned right side out, and I find it helpful to iron them flat at this point, so I'm going to go do that. I like to fold mine over a little bit, not quite halfway, and pin it. We're going to do the same thing for the other side. Fold it over, not quite halfway, and pin. And now I'm going to use a straight stitch right on the edge just to keep my fold in place. So now you should have 2 ears that look like this. We're going to now start on the doll body. We're going to take one of the pieces that will be the front of the doll. You can use your paper pattern as a guide. We're going to take the nose and put it about there. I'm going to pin it in place, and using a straight stitch, I'm going to sew pretty close to the edge all the way around the nose. And now our nose is sewn onto the doll. Now, you can do the nose a couple of different ways. I'm going to use embroidery floss, so I'm going to choose a color that I think looks nice. You could also use fabric paint. Paint on the nostrils and allow this to dry for 24 hours before continuing. You could also sew tiny buttons for nostrils. I'm just going to stitch a couple of little lines to represent the nostrils on the cow. I'm going to make a knot in the back of my project. I like to double knot it just to be sure. And now we have a little nose. I'm going to put the horns on next. So I'm going to decide where I want my horns to go. I want mine to be about right here. I'm going to have them pinned to the doll, pointing down. And now I'm going to sew these to the doll using a straight stitch pretty close to the edge just to keep them in place. So now our horns are attached to the doll. I'm going to put the ears on next. You want to put them right sides together. This is the right side where there's a little bit of the ear showing. When we did the fold, we didn't quite fold it halfway. This is the front. So you're going to put right sides together like this, and we're going to pin it to the side of the doll's head. I pinned mine like this with a little bit of edge left on the side of the doll because I know I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch of seam allowance and I don't want to lose any length on my ears. I'm just going to stitch right here with a straight stitch just to hold everything in place. Now we are going to start thinking about what we're going to do for the eyes of the doll. You can use fabric paint. Just make sure you allow it to dry for 24 hours before you continue sewing the doll. You could also use embroidery floss or embroidery thread and do eyes like that. You could use small buttons. I prefer to use safety eyes, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark where I would like my safety eyes to go with a pencil. I am using a poker to make a hole for my safety eyes. If you need to, you can also use some small scissors to make the hole a little bit bigger. Just be careful with this step so that you don't ruin all of the work that you just did. Now that my eyes are on, it's time to put both of the body pieces together, right sides together. If you try and pin this together with the safety eyes on the bottom, it tends to get really bumpy. I like to pin it like this with the safety eyes on the top so that everything remains as flat as possible while I'm pinning. I have my doll body pieces pinned together. I'm going to sew up and around the doll, leaving the bottom open for turning. I'm going to use a straight stitch about a 1/2 inch for seam allowance. And don't forget to do a back stitch to lock everything in place. I finished stitching all the way around my doll, and now I'm going to cut off the excess fabric. This is going to help reduce the bulkiness for the finished piece, and it will help when turning the piece right side out. And now we get to turn the doll right side out. You should have something that looks like this. I'm going to put her aside and I'm going to sew the limbs. I'm going to put the limbs right sides together and pin. Right now I'm working on the legs, and then pin. I like to use just one pin, but if you need to use more, that is perfectly fine. I have 2 arms right sides together, pinned together, and 2 legs. I'm going to sew them with a straight stitch with a 1/2 inch of seam allowance while sewing. I will be cutting off excess fabric to help reduce bulkiness and to help ease the turning of the piece. If you're concerned about this doll holding up properly to extreme play, I recommend also doing a zigzag stitch around the edge just to help everything be super, super durable. Okay, I have all 4 of my limbs. I'm going to turn them right side out. You might want to use a chopstick or a pencil to help you do this. Now I'm going to show you how to attach the legs to the body. I'm going to take the body and take the raw edge and turn it in on itself, maybe about a 1/2 inch or so, something like that. You can put a pin in here if that's helpful for you. I'm going to take one of the legs. I'm going to put it inside of the cow body, also about a 1/2 inch or so. I like to try and line up my seams on the leg with the seam on the side of the body. This will take a little bit of finagling, but I promise the further we get into it, the easier it will get. Now I'm going to take my needle and thread, and I'm going to start stitching. I like to try and hide the knot inside of the doll. So if I need to, I will try and poke the knot down inside of there. Now I'm just going to use a simple straight stitch to go all the way across the doll's body. Okay, and now that leg is tacked in place. I don't have to worry about holding that anymore. I'm going to sew a little bit along the bottom of the doll before attaching the other leg. Now I'm starting to get about halfway through, and I think it's about time to stick the other leg in. I'm going to try and finagle it a little bit to make sure that both legs are the same length. I don't want one leg poking out more than the other. I like to try and line up the seams on the side. It's not necessary. That's just how I like to do it. And I'm going to continue sewing across. All right, I have sewn all the way across one time just using a basic straight stitch or running stitch. Now I'm going to go back across the other way, making sure that my stitches going in between all of those gaps. Insert my needle so that my stitch meets where that last one ends. There shouldn't be any gaps in the stitching because when you're going back through the other way, you're filling in all of those gaps so that there is a streamline of running stitches or straight stitches all the way across the bottom of the doll. So do you see here how the stitches go all the way across the bottom and there are no gaps? If you are unsure if your stitches are tight enough, you can also go back and forth several times just to make sure everything is super, super secure. I am going to go ahead and make a knot. I like to make at least 2 knots just to be sure everything stays where I want it. Then I like to hide my excess thread by poking into the doll and then cutting off the thread like that. And now we're going to work on the arms. They have been stuffed. I'm going to turn the raw edge inside on itself about a 1/2 inch or so. It's a really good idea to fold down the raw edge of both arms at the same time so you can lay them next to each other and make sure that one arm is not longer than the other. Now, there are a couple different ways that you could close up the arm. I like to do a whip stitch because I like seeing the stitches. It gives like the hallmark and the whimsy of having a handmade doll. It's also very secure. That's what I prefer. You could also go through and just do a straight stitch if you're comfortable with that. That's what we did at the bottom of the doll right here. You could do an invisible stitch if you don't want to see any stitch marks. I prefer to do a whip stitch that I'm going to show you right now. I have the arm so that both seams are on the side. And I'm just going to hide my knot on the inside of the doll. And I like to just do a small whip stitch all the way across the top of the arm. Now at this point, I like to add a button. So I'm going to put my needle in and poke it out about right here. And I like to use these small wooden buttons. You can use whatever you like. They're just like buttons you would use on a dress shirt or something like that. These are the ones that I like to use. So I'm actually going to put the button on right now. And I'm not trying to super securely attach my button. I'm just putting enough stitches just to hold it in place. I'm going to make a knot at the back of the arm. Do another knot for extra security and cut off the excess. And we're going to do that to the other arm as well. Now, this is where you are going to want a doll making needle. This needle is pretty long. I'd say maybe 5 inches, maybe 4.5 inches or so. You can do this next step with a regular needle. It's just going to take a lot more squishing to get the needle all the way across. I have both of the arms done and ready. On the back of one arm, I'm going to poke through. I'm going to go through the button back to the back of the arm. Okay. And now I'm going to figure out exactly where I want my arms to go on the doll. I want them to go about right here. So first I'm just going to do a little stitch just to get that arm in the right spot. Now I'm going to go back into the arm. Every time I go through the arm, I want to make sure I'm going through the button. That is what is going to help make this attachment very, very secure because you're going through the button each time. Okay, now I'm going to do that again. Pull it nice and tight. I just went through the arm. Now I'm going to go into the doll's body. Just make a small, small, small stitch. Pull it nice and tight. Going back into the doll's arm through the button. Back into the button. And now I'm going to go all the way across to the other side of the doll. This is why having a doll making needle is very, very helpful. I'm going to go through the back of the other arm, through the button, back through the button to the back of the arm, and pull to get that arm in place where I want it. Now I'm going to go through the doll's shoulder like this. I loosened up my arm a little bit so you could see what I was doing. Pull it nice and tight. Go back through the arm to the button. Go through the button. Back in through the button. And now I'm going to start going all the way across again to the other side of the doll. Once I've poked through the body on the other side of the doll, I'm going into the arm, back through the button, back into the button. I'm being very careful and mindful where my needle is poking out. I kind of want it to stay in the same general area just so you don't really see those stitches. And I'm going to go all the way through the doll again to the other side. Through the arm, poke through the buttonhole, back in through the buttonhole, into the arm, into the body, all the way back across to the other side, and repeat. So I will do this over and over and over again until I feel like my arms are very, very secure. And then I'm going to show you how I tie off. I also like to do this with at least a couple strands of thread. So I'm done with this one. And this arm feels pretty secure. So what I'm going to do actually is wrap the arm with some of the excess thread. This just kind of helps give it a little bit of a cleaner look, and it helps kind of protect those stitches. And now I'm going to make a knot. I'm going to make another knot. And then I'm going to do the same thing where I poke through the doll just to kind of hide that excess thread. Now I'm going to get myself a little bit more thread on the needle, go back through a couple more times just to make sure everything's very, very secure. And then when I tie off, I've already wrapped this thread right here. I'm going to tie off on this side where I wrap the inner arm a little bit with the thread and then tie it off. You just finished making the doll. You can customize it by adding bows or felt flowers to the head. To learn how to make the clothes, check the description box. Thank you so much for sewing with me, and I'll catch you next time.